Hi everyone, I'm Ben, the Amateur Exegete, and this is episode 57 of Bible Study for Amateurs. Today's episode is A Slave Named Useful. Last time we looked at verses 8 through 10 of Paul's letter to Philemon. Let's pick up where we left off. Here is verse 11, as it appears in the NRSV. Formerly he was useless to you, but now he is indeed useful both to you and to me. The he is Onesimus, who, per verse 10, became a son to Paul, likely through conversion. Writing in the Women's Bible Commentary, Mitzi Smith observes that Paul's description of Onesimus as once useless, akreston, but now returned as useful, eukreston, belies typical slave owner expectations of slaves. Slaves were expected to be useful and productive. This once again underscores two facts about slavery in Roman antiquity and in modern times, highlighted by Eric Barreto in the Fortress Commentary on the Bible. He writes, First, both systems converted people into commodities, products that could be owned and used for the benefit of an owner. The dehumanization present in such economic systems is inescapable, no matter the rationales tied into these systems of slavery. Second, both systems lean on the stratification of a hierarchical society in which some are owners and others are slaves. Some are inherently superior and others must defer to them. Such hierarchy is antithetical to the gospel as enunciated by Paul in Philemon. That last sentence is, in my view, not entirely correct, but that's a topic for another day. Barreto's main points regarding the nature of slavery are important for the discussion here because the language of usefulness and uselessness signifies both the dehumanization, he notes, as well as a lack of autonomy. To be a slave meant you were not your own. You had little, if any, agency. While the language of uselessness and usefulness points to the reality of slavery and expectations slave owners had of their property, there is perhaps something else going on here. In her notes for the New Oxford Annotated Bible, Margaret Mitchell observes that there is something of a double pun going on in this verse. The name Onesimus means something like useful or beneficial. So, the Greek word eukreston, rendered useful in verse 11, is a pun on Onesimus's name. Additionally, the nominative form of eukreston would be eukrestos, which sounds like you, Christos, or good Christ, or good in Christ. Mitchell writes that this double pun refers then both to Onesimus's name and his identity in Christ. Clever, that Paul. In what way was Onesimus useless to Philemon, but now, after his experience with Paul, useful to both? Conversion must have something to do with it, but beyond that, it isn't entirely clear. Some see in verse 18 a sign that Onesimus was a runaway slave, fleeing from Philemon because he stole something or wronged him in some way. That's a possibility, but for now it suffices to say that Paul views the utility of Onesimus as changed. But this, of course, means that Paul is thinking of Onesimus in terms akin to that of a slave owner. Onesimus is a means to an end. Throughout this letter, one gets the sense that Onesimus is merely a pawn to be played, rather than a person to be appreciated. The language of verse 12, I am sending him, that is my own heart, back to you, rings a bit hollow, especially in light of Paul's rhetorical aims. He's trying to get something out of Philemon, the labor of Onesimus. Why think this? Here is verse 13. I wanted to keep him with me, so that he might be of service to me in your place during my imprisonment for the gospel. You might recall from previous episodes that prisoners were totally dependent on others for their care while imprisoned. The service provided by Onesimus is no doubt connected to that. Paul had need for Onesimus, and it seems that he didn't really want to send him back to Philemon, but, per Paul in verse 14, I preferred to do nothing without your consent, in order that your good deed might be voluntary, and not something forced. With these words, we are inching ever closer to the question of why Onesimus was with Paul in the first place. Was he deliberately sent to him? Was he a runaway slave? That's a topic we will need to look at in more detail when we consider verses 15 and 16. That's all the time we've got this week. See you next time. And remember, in the words of Richard Elliott Friedman, one does not need to deny what is troubling about the Bible in order to pay respect to what is heartening. Thanks for stopping by.